Hello and welcome to TheFIX, a podcast about Photoshop, Lightroom, post-processing, and the cool and creative things we get to do with our images after the shoot. I'm Seán Duggan, your host, and on this week's show we're going to take a look at the Creative Cloud connection between Photoshop on the desktop and the mobile apps Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix on an iPad. Well, hey there. Welcome to TheFIX. Thank you for tuning in and joining me. Let's get this show on the road. Got a lot to cover. This is a mobile-themed show dealing with Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix. And specifically, we're going to be talking about the kind of way it all ties together with Photoshop on your desktop, saving a file to Creative Cloud so you can open it in Photoshop Mix, and then the back and forth between Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix. And then finally, taking your layered file with transparency and masks that you create in Photoshop Mix and having that open up in Photoshop on your desktop. Pretty cool stuff. But before we get to that, a couple of items of business and some announcements to pass along. First, we have the return of the Rocky Nook book giveaway next week. So that'll be the episode that airs on Tuesday, May 17th. And we're going to be giving away a book that was authored by our guest that week. And it's a very cool book and a very cool guest. So make sure you tune in for that. Again, that's going to be next week, episode 66 on May 17th. The other thing kind of ties into the whole mobile theme of this show, and that is a workshop that I am going to be participating in and assisting with. That's going to be taking place at Photoshop World in Las Vegas on Monday, July 18th. And it is a pre-conference workshop at Photoshop World, so it's an additional price in addition to the normal Photoshop World conference price. I think it's about $99. And this is a workshop that is actually more than a workshop. It is a whole experience. And it is being orchestrated by none other than Russell Preston Brown from Adobe Systems. And it is called Cirque Photographique. I have to kind of say that with a little bit of a French accent there, or as much of a French accent as I can muster. So Cirque Photographique is going to be a mobile photography creativity workshop, and as the title would suggest, the theme of circus. And if you have ever participated in or seen any of the events that Russell Brown puts on, you know it's going to be very good. And I am privy to some of the behind the scenes details about what's going to be going on. So there's going to be kind of a three-ring circus, as it were, theme. We're going to have a photography ring, which is where I'm going to be working and teaching and helping out people. And we're going to be doing creative photography things with our mobile devices, iPhones, Android phones, and of course tablet devices. And then there's also going to be performers that we get to photograph, cool acrobats and circus performers. They're going to be well lit there for us to photograph and try out cool creative photography techniques with our mobile devices. There's going to be a video ring where you get to try out and play with the DJI Osmo stabilized video camera, those kind of cool handheld video cameras that are gimbal stabilized. Really, really cool devices. There's going to be an iPad Pro Studio where you get to work on Lightroom Mobile and Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix on the iPad, and tying all this together, working between Creative Cloud, the Adobe mobile apps, video, photography, stills, performers. Plus, there's going to be a special guest, and I'm not going to spoil it because Russell has not announced it yet that I'm aware of, so I'm not going to say what that special guest or that special performer is going to be, but that's going to be very, very cool. Anyway, it's going to be a great event, wonderful experience, lots of learning, a lot of great talented people who are going to be there. along with me and Russell, of course, helping out all the participants. And at the end, there's going to be a drawing where the winner will win either an Epson SureColor SCP-600 or a DJI Osmo stabilized video camera. That would be cool. I would like to have one of those. So anyway, that is coming up on Monday, July 18th. It's going to run from noon to 6 p.m. Le Cirque Photographique. I will put a link in the show notes. Make sure you click on that and head over. If you're going to be going to Photoshop World anyway that week, think about it. There's still spaces left. It's going to be a really great event where you're going to learn a lot about kind of taking your mobile photography and mobile video skills to the next level, and even your mobile processing skills too. So I'm really looking forward to participating in that. And if you're going, I will see you there. All right, so that is that. Now the next thing, this is a good segue, because now we can segue into what's going on with the topic for this week's show, which is Adobe Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix. There were some updates last week. This would be the week of May 4th. And the cool thing about the updates is that both Photoshop Fix and Photoshop Mix will now import full resolution images from Lightroom. So there's no longer the previous 2000 by 2000 pixel resolution limit. That is no more. So that is a good thing. And then in terms of Photoshop Fix, they've also improved and enhanced the vignette feature. So it will automatically identify a face and create the initial vignette around the face. And of course, you can adjust that if you want to. There is a little metadata information panel in Photoshop Fix, which will show you, the basic specs of your image, including, the format, the image resolution, when it was taken, things like that. And then the other thing about Photoshop Mix is that it now supports Adobe Smart Links, which are useful in managing Adobe stock images if you use those services. So several updates and a few other little improvements here or there. One thing to note about Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix, just to clarify, both of these are free apps, which you can get from the App Store or the Google Play Marketplace for Photoshop Mix, but Photoshop Fix at this time is still only for iOS. But they are free apps. However, to take advantage fully of the integration with Adobe Creative Cloud, you do have to have a Creative Cloud subscription. So that would be, at the base level, the photography plan, which is $9.99 a month, which gives you, of course, the full latest versions of Photoshop and Lightroom CC. And then you get the mobile apps. And we'll be seeing some of that Creative Cloud integration in the demo that I'm going to be diving into here very shortly. So I think, speaking of which, that is all I have to say about that. Oh, right, one more thing. About a month and a half ago, I did a show on mobile compositing in Photoshop Mix. That was episode 59, if my memory serves me correctly. Came out at the end of March. So I will put a link to that in the show notes, so you can watch that episode if you want to see more about Photoshop Mix. And then back on Halloween, or just before Halloween, I did a show with Russell Preston Brown from Adobe that was an exploration of both Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix working together. And Russell did a kind of create your own monster kit, and there was a monster makeup kit that you can download and apply to your own photos. A lot of fun stuff. Even though it's not Halloween, it's always fun to work with monster images. So I'll put a link to that in the show notes as well. Some additional resources for you if you want to learn more about Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix. Excuse me, Photoshop Mix. Yes, Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix. So easy to get those things mixed up. All right, so without further ado, let's start our journey in Photoshop on the desktop. Okay, so here in Photoshop, I have a composite file that I've already created. I've added these steps into the rock face image. And I've already flattened a copy of this image here so I can move it over onto my iPad via my Creative Cloud Files folder. So I'm going to go to the File menu. I'm just going to choose Save As. And I'll come over here to choose my Creative Cloud folder. And I'm going to go into a folder I already have specified for this episode. And I'm just going to call this Cliff Steps. I'll save it as a JPEG, and I'll click Save. Now, if we come up here and look at my Creative Cloud icon, you can see that if I open that up, that it is syncing the files. And so what it is synchronizing is the file that I just saved to my Creative Cloud folder on my local desktop machine here. That's going to be now uploading that to the Creative Cloud so it'll be available on my iPad. So that's almost done. Let's go over to the iPad and check it out. All right, here on my iPad, I'm going to go to my folder of Adobe apps, and I'll go to Photoshop Mix, and I'm going to tap on the plus symbol over here on the left side to open up a new file. And I'm going to come to my Creative Cloud choice here on the left side. And if I tap Files up here, you can see that that actually opens up a menu where there are a range of different places where I could bring in files, several Adobe mobile apps such as Illustrator Draw, Illustrator Line, Photoshop Sketch, etc. But I'm going to go to my Files choice, and I'm going to go into a folder that I've created for this project. And I'm going to choose the file that I just recently saved out of Photoshop, and I'm going to choose this file called Cliff Steps, which is the one that I just recently saved from Photoshop on my desktop computer. And if you recall, I made sure that I saved that into my Creative Cloud folder on my desktop computer, and that made sure that it synchronized and is now available on my iPad. So I'll tap that to open that up, and I'll just choose Open File. Now, since this is a file that is flattened, there are no other choices here, but if it was a layered file, there would be the option to extract individual layers. I'll just tap Open File. Now, since this is being opened up over the internet, the time it takes to open will vary based on the speed of your own internet connection. So as the old car commercial saying goes, your mileage may vary. But it opened right up, didn't take too long, so now I have this as the background layer in my composition. Now the next thing I'm going to do is go over to Photoshop Fix to open up another file and do some prep work there. And the reason I'm doing that, going into Photoshop Fix first, rather than bringing my layer from Photoshop Mix over to Photoshop Fix, is simply because there are some limitations to what you can do in Photoshop Fix if the journey there starts here in Photoshop Mix. Let me show you what I mean. If I have this layer active here and I tap on the Creative Cloud button up in the top, you see that I have two options there. I can either liquify in Photoshop Fix, or I can apply healing in Photoshop Fix. But that's all that I can do there when that journey is initiated here in Photoshop Mix. And what I want to do to the next file that I want to work on is neither liquefying nor healing. So for that, I'm going to have to just go directly into Photoshop Fix. So let me tap my home button, go back out to my apps here, and I'll choose Photoshop Fix. And I'll tap on the plus button to open a file. I'm going to go and get a file from my camera roll. And I'm going to get this picture of the door. So what I want to do here is I want to remove the door. I want to totally have it be that kind of uniform, very dark gray color in there. Now you might think, of course, that I could come in and use the healing tools or the clone stamp tool, but actually in this case, it's just a lot easier to paint in a solid color. So I'll choose the paint option down at the bottom. And the first thing I'm going to do is reset my tools. So I'm going to tap here on opacity and then drag all the way up to 100 to make sure that that's set to 100%. And my brush hardness is probably fine the way it is, maybe about 50%. And the size is also fine, maybe at about 40 or 50, something like that. What I want to do is I want to sample a color from within the image. So I'll tap on the Pick Color eyedropper, and I'll just tap right above the top of the door to sample that color. Next, I'll come back and tap on Paint. And let me use my thumb and forefinger to zoom up a little bit closer here. And I'm going to just start painting here. Now, nothing is happening, and that's because when you first come into this tool, it is automatically set to blend. And let me just show you what blend does. If I paint over here on the columns, you'll see it's removing the color. That's because it is painting with this kind of dark gray color in the color blending mode. What I want to do is just paint with the actual color, so I'm going to turn the blend off, and here you can see what that looks like. Just a solid flat color. Now obviously I don't really need that, so I'm going to tap the undo button to get rid of that. I'm going to make sure that blend is still turned off here. So now you can see what it looks like up at the top there. So I'm just going to continue painting that in. And I'm not really going to worry too much that it's not matching perfectly. If I want to, I can make my eyedropper tool active again and sample another color. For instance, I'll tap on the left side of the door here, switch back to the brush tool, and then continue painting that in there. And I'm going to smooth this out a little bit shortly, so that's why I'm not too concerned. I'm going to go back to the eyedropper tool and sample a color on the right side of the door here and bring that in like so. And let's zoom down a bit. And what I'm going to do now is just sort of continue painting over that to make that a nice dark color. I'm not worried about being too precise because I know that the way that I'm going to blend this in the other image is going to be somewhat forgiving. And let me actually just might as well, while I'm there, let's get rid of those lanterns. I don't want those. All right, so I've made some mistakes, so let's fix the mistakes. I'll just tap on Restore down here, and I'll just come in and brush over those areas to bring those back in like that. And right here I had some where I made a mistake, and right here as well. I'm using a stylus as I do this, and it's not any fancy stylus like an Apple Pencil or anything like that. It's just one of those, inexpensive styluses that'll cost you, sometimes they'll cost you only a couple of bucks. But anywhere, up to $10 you might pay for these depending on how deluxe they are. And it just kind of makes it easier to work with this. All right, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to go back to the paint option. I'm going to lower my opacity by just selecting that and dragging down. And I'm just going to continue painting here at a lower opacity just to kind of blend that in there. And that's looking pretty good overall. And I'm going to tap the check mark to apply that. Now, while I'm in here, I'm also going to do a little bit of healing. So I'll tap on the healing option. And let me just use my thumb and forefinger to zoom up to show the little intercom device there. And I'll just brush over that to hide that. Guess I need to make a second pass over that. There we go, that's pretty good. Again, it's not totally precise, but for our purposes, it'll work fine. I'm also going to get rid of these little scrolls that kind of come into the door, just because I have a feeling that they're going to cause a problem and look a little bit odd the way that we're going to blend this. And it's having a little bit of trouble there. Well, there we go, that's better. Let's come over this one here. Okay, that's fine. All right, so let me just tap the check mark button. Let me zoom out a little bit. And, here's one more thing I wanted to heal. These little door stops down here look a little odd. I just want to hide those. There we go. And then, finally, before I bring this back in, I want to darken it down. So I'm going to tap on Adjust. And right now we're set to exposure, so I am going to bring this exposure down a little bit to darken that. I might want to bring the highlights back up because I still want to have those kind of light. And let me tap on shadows and bring that back down. And you can see that there's a little blue line under each of those adjustments that I made just to tell me what I have indeed adjusted. So that looks pretty good. I'll just tap OK to that. And now I'm going to save this. So I'll come up to the little save or export button up at the top, and I'll just choose to save that to the camera roll. Of course, there's a choice there that I could send that to Photoshop CC, and it would appear as a layered file on my desktop version of Photoshop. But for now, I'm just going to save that out to my camera roll so that I can bring it into Photoshop Mix. All right, let me just exit out of there, and let's go back to Photoshop Mix. All right, so I'm going to add a new layer here by tapping the little plus button above my background layer over on the right side. And I'm going to go out to my camera roll, and I'll choose the most recent file that I just saved there. And the first thing I'm going to do is apply a blending mode. So I'll tap on Blend down at the bottom. And by the way, you know what layer is active when you're working in Photoshop Mix by the fact that it has a little blue outline around the layer thumbnail, and it even has a blue outline around the main image area of the layer. I'm going to choose the Darken Blend mode, because what that does is emphasize the darker areas on this layer when it's compared with the layer below. So I do see a little bit of kind of area above the arch of the door where some of the darker areas of the architecture is showing through, but I can easily get rid of those. But right off the bat, that looks okay, so I'll just tap OK to that. And let me come into the cutout feature. And in order to see the layer of the door with the layer of the cliff, I need to tap on this little layer icon up in the top right. And you can see that what that does is it shows me my composite view. For my brush, I am going to leave this set to basic here because I don't need to use the smart brush. And I'm going to choose minus over here, or subtract on the left side. And I'll just brush over that to hide those areas there so I don't see those. Let me make sure my feather is turned down there. There we go. That's all I need to worry about for now. And I'm just going to tap the check mark to apply that. All right, now what I want to do is bring in another layer of this same picture of the door, but with the door still there. So to do that, I'll tap the plus button up at the top of the layer stack. I'll go out to my camera roll, and I'll go and find the original picture of that door. Now, because I haven't moved or resized the first layer of the door, everything is fitting down in place there, and the two layers are aligned. So what I want to do is a couple things. I want to go over to Photoshop Fix and apply a liquify effect to that door. So I'm going to make sure that that layer is active, and I'll tap on the Creative Cloud button up in the upper right, and I'll choose liquify in Photoshop Fix. All right, so my options here in the liquify dialog are to change the size of my brush. So if I tap on that brush and drag up or down, like you can see, I can change the size of the brush. I'm going to leave it set to a fairly large size brush, maybe about, I don't know, 30, something like that. And then I can choose to warp, swell, or twirl, and there's also a reconstruct option there. Now, if I had a picture of a person, there are options where I can liquify using the face architecture, essentially. But obviously, I don't have that, so I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to leave this set to warp right now. And I'm going to use my thumb and forefinger to zoom up a bit so I can see this a bit better. And I'm going to come in from the side, kind of over where the lamp is there on the left side. And I'm just going to drag in and start to warp that door in there to make it look a little bit surreal. So what I'm going for here is kind of a a through the looking glass effect, Alice in Wonderland, something like that. And we'll maybe bring this corner down, and maybe we'll bring this upper corner here up a bit higher. Something like that, just so it looks, a little bit strange, a little bit surreal. Something from a dream, maybe. There we go. Something like that looks good. All right, so I will tap the Save and Return to Photoshop Mix bar up at the top. Now, if for some reason you wanted to just totally abandon this, if you tap on Options up in the upper left, you'll see that there is an option to just abandon and return. But for my purposes, I am going to tap that top blue bar, Save and Return to Photoshop Mix. And you can see it has applied the warp. So my next step is I need to mask this new warped door layer, so we're only seeing the warped door and nothing else. And to do that, I want to go into the cutout mode. Now, before I do that, let me just explain one thing to you. As long as a layer is active here, and you know that a particular layer is active by looking for the blue highlight border around the layer thumbnail or the blue border around the main layer, if you try to pinch and zoom here in this overview mode, it will resize that layer. So let me just do that for you. Whoops, there we go. So I didn't want that to happen, so I'm going to tap the undo button up here, this little curved backward facing arrow to undo that. But if you just tap on an empty area below the selected layer, you'll see now I have no layers active, and now I can zoom the whole picture. So that's how you would navigate through the picture if you wanted to. But just make sure if you want to zoom in the whole picture that none of the layers are selected. All right, I'm going to come into the cutout mode. Now, so I can see this layer in conjunction with everything else, I'm going to tap on the little layer button up in the upper right, and that shows me the composite view. For this, I'm not going to use the smart option. What the smart option does is it senses, it's kind of like the quick selection tool in Photoshop. It senses edges and borders of an element based on brightness or contrast values. For this, I'm just going to leave this set to basic. And I'm going to, again, zoom up a little bit closer. And I'm going to start painting. Let me just make sure my feather is set to 0 here for the moment. I'm going to start painting over the door. And I'm not going to worry too much about being super precise along the edges. I'm going to make my brush size a bit bigger, I think, so I can cover more ground here. And I'll just come down here and paint over this. And you can see how now it is hiding everything that I have not painted on. And this is giving us this effect of the door showing up here against the black arched background that I created earlier. So I'm down to the bottom here. I need to use 2 fingers now to zoom, because of course if I just use 1 finger it will paint. So I'm going to use my thumb and forefinger on the screen and just kind of drag up there to reposition that. And we'll just come in here and reveal the rest of the door down here at the bottom. All right, that looks pretty good. Let's make sure I got all the edges here. Again, I'm using 2 fingers to reposition the image here. Now there's probably some places where I've got a little bit too much showing. So in that case, I will come down here where it says Add in the lower left. I'll just tap that button to switch it to Subtract, and now I can subtract out places where I think I've gotten in a little bit too much showing. Now I'm going to be able to modify this further using the feather command, so I'm not worried about being super precise here. Just kind of getting the real obvious parts out of there. All right, that's good enough for now. Let's see how I can modify this with the feather command. So I'll tap on feather, press and hold on feather, and then raise the feather up, and look at how that is doing a really nice job of kind of blending that in there. So maybe if I bring that feather up to, I don't know, maybe about 34 or something like that. And if I have this set to subtract, I can still come in here and subtract some of those edges there where it's looking a little bit obvious. There we go, that's looking pretty cool. Maybe a little bit above the top. But that feather really helps there. Let me just switch to plus and bring in a little bit more on the sides here. Okay, I think that looks okay for now. Let me just kind of zoom out a bit more so I can see what's going on. Yeah, I like that. All right, so I'm going to tap the check mark to apply that. So now that I have that masked, I can make this layer a little bit larger if I want. Now this layer of the warp door is still active here, so I can pinch up and reposition this here to fill a little bit more of that arch. There we go. And now I can do some fine tuning with the mask on the door as well as the mask on the dark archway. Now I'm referring to these as masks, even though I went and used the cutout tool to create them, but they are in fact masks because it is a non-destructive cutout. The areas that I supposedly cut out are actually still there. They're just hidden right now. So I'm going to tap on the empty area around the layers just to make sure none are selected and kind of zoom up close so I can see what's going on there. Let me move this layer down below and then drag it up again on the top. The reason I moved it down below just to see what's going on there. So with that top layer active, I'll go back into cutout and you can see what's happening here, how the hard edge is showing there. So let me just choose minus and make my brush size smaller here and just kind of paint over that area there to see if we can get that edge there. And if I lower the opacity, you can see, or excuse me, the feather, you can see how that is affecting those edges there. And again, if you want to see it in terms of the composite view, you tap on the layer icon up in the top there. I'm going to say OK to that, and then again, I'm going to just sort of move this around to sort of see what's happening with that layer. I'm just going to bring this door up so it's right there on that edge. And then I can see I've got a little bit of problems here with the edge of the other mask. So I'm going to make that active. And now here's an interesting conundrum here. If I tap, I'm zoomed in so close that if I tap on elsewhere in the image, it might want to select this other layer here. But if I just tap again a couple times, I can finally get it to a point where none of the layers are selected. And so then I can reposition this here. What I want to do is just modify this so that the edge of the door kind of fits the edge of the stairs better. So I'll make the door arch layer active. And again, using my thumb and forefinger, I will just come in here and come down like that. So then it sort of fits that a little bit better. I can see I got a little problem over here on the left side. There's a little bit of a head showing up there. So let's come into cutout and subtract. Set my feather down to 0, and we will subtract that. We don't want to see that hedge over there. And we don't want to see this number down here. Let's just actually just sort of really go over all of the edges of this just to make sure that we don't have any hard edges showing. There we go. Something like that looks pretty good. And we'll tap on the composite view to see what that looks like. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. I'll tap OK to that. Tap to deselect my layers and zoom up close here. So the other thing I'm going to do now is I want to copy the background layer and bring that copy up to the top. So with that background layer active now, I'll just tap on it again and I'll choose duplicate. And then I'll bring that duplicate up to the top. I'll just drag that thumbnail out here and put it up to the top of the stack. And then what I'm going to do is I'll come in and I'll use the cutout feature there. And I want to choose subtract. And again, I'm going to leave it set to the basic brush because I don't need to do any fancy content-aware selection here. And I'll just paint over that to hide that area there. And let me tap on the layer icon up in the top so I can see what I'm doing. And now that I'm getting close here, I'm going to zoom up closer so I can fine-tune this edge here so that it fits the edge of the steps. And let's zoom out here to see what's going on. And I think I need to bring this down a little bit more, down onto this step. And how far down does this door go? What's going on here with this? All right, yeah, there's the bottom edge that was problematic. Okay, so now I'm going to tap subtract again to switch it back to add. And now I can come in here and gradually bring this in here to bring this top step to where the top step is showing up here. That looks good. Let me add a slight feather onto that edge just to soften that down just a bit, not much, just a bit. Something like that looks pretty good. And let's tap the check mark to say okay to that. Again, to zoom out, I'm going to just tap off these layers just somewhere else in the image. Now you can see none of them are selected. So let me zoom down here. And it looks like I need to come back in here to cut out because I'm missing the top part of this. Oops, need to set that to subtract. There we go. And tap OK again. There we go. Now that's working pretty good. All right, so what I want to do is I want to maybe use the adjust feature on this top layer and just bring the exposure down a bit. Again, to see what I'm doing, I'm going to tap that layer icon up in the top there, and I'm just going to bring that exposure down. And mainly I'm just concerned about what's going on with the steps there. Something like that looks pretty good. I'm not bringing it down too much. All right, that looks good. All right, so I'm essentially done with my composite at this point, and we've seen a little bit of the back and forth that you can do between Photoshop Mix and Photoshop Fix, but just remember that when you're dealing with that back and forth between Mix and Fix, you can only work with the active layer, so you can bring an active layer over to Photoshop Mix. And if you tap that Creative Cloud button up at the top, you only have the two options to liquify or apply healing in Photoshop Fix. If there are other things that you want to do, you'll have to do those things separately. All right, so the last thing I'm going to cover is how to save this so that it shows up in Photoshop on the desktop. And to do that, you just come up here to the Export or Save button, this little box with the upward facing arrow, and you can choose to send to Photoshop CC. Now, as long as that version of Photoshop on your computer desktop is open and running, and you're signed in using the same Creative Cloud ID that you're signed into on your iPad, it will prepare this file and send it up through Creative Cloud and then back down to your desktop and open it up in Photoshop. And if Photoshop is not open, the file will open up the next time you launch the app. Now, depending on the size of the file and how many layers you have, that will all influence how long it takes to render the PSD file. And then, of course, it is going to have to upload it. So in terms of how long that takes, your mileage may vary. It all really boils down to the speed of your internet connection. So we'll pick this up again here in a few minutes once this shows up on my desktop in Photoshop. All right, well, back in Photoshop, you can see that here is my file that's finally opened up here into Photoshop. This is the file that I was just working on in Photoshop Mix over on the iPad, and when I chose to send to Photoshop CC, it prepared a layered PSD file. It uploaded it to the Creative Cloud servers, which then, of course, made it appear in my Creative Cloud folder, and then it opened up into Photoshop. So let's take a quick peek at the layers panel here because it did preserve all the layers that I had created. I'm going to hold down the Option key on Mac or the Alt key on Windows just to click on the eye icon of the background layer. So there's the basic image that I brought in when we started, which was the composite where I had added in the steps to that cliff wall. Next, I have the second layer, which was the kind of the blackened archway that I had set the blend mode to darken. And notice that that blend mode is still honored right here. I can set that to normal if I want, and it goes back to normal. So let me just actually set that back to darken. We've got a layer mask here that represents the painting that I did in Photoshop Mix. And then this next layer here is, of course, the warped door. And of course, that has a layer mask that is based on the painting that I did in the cutout mode in Photoshop Mix. And then I have this adjustment group here, which has a layer mask. And by the way I'm showing the layer mask is I'm just Option or Alt clicking on the thumbnail of the layer mask. So if I open up this Smart Filter section here, we can see that there's been a Camera Raw Smart Filter that has been applied. So this is a really useful functionality to be able to work on an image on your iPad or other mobile device, because of course Photoshop Mix is available for Android devices, although Photoshop Fix is not. But you can work on that and then save the layered file and have it open up in Photoshop on the desktop. So what I like to use this for is a lot of times when I'm traveling, I'll be working on initial composites, almost like maybe a proof of concept composite. And I want to do my fine-tuning work back in Photoshop on the desktop where I have a little bit more control, so I can bring that back and all my layers are there. I've got layer masks, my blend modes are still preserved. So it really is a very useful workflow for combining your mobile photography and mobile processing on an iPad or an Android tablet with what you can then do in Photoshop on the desktop. Once I had this in Photoshop, I added a few additional touches just to advance this a little bit further along its journey. I modified the bottom of the layer mask for the door to integrate some of the actual threshold at the bottom of the door with the rough stone steps. Then I added a new layer behind the door to suggest a recessed face of the cliff wall. I added a bevel and emboss layer style or layer effect to that to suggest depth, as if the alcove was recessed a bit. And then I added an adjustment layer above that was clipped to my new cliff texture layer, which darkened that down and just integrated in a little bit better and made it look a little bit more natural. So being able to take the layered files that you create in Photoshop Mix and bring them into Photoshop CC on the desktop is just a really useful way to start a project on a mobile platform and then bring it onto the desktop for further refinements. All right, well, that brings us to the end of another episode of TheFIX. If you are watching this on our webpage, thisweekinphoto.com/TheFIX, please subscribe to the show. There's a box over on the right-hand side of the page where you can do that very thing. And there's also a place where you can sign up for our email list where you'll be notified of new episodes and you can get exclusive subscriber bonuses. If you want to get in touch and leave feedback, suggestions, comments, ideas for future shows, you can get in touch with me directly by using our contact form. Just go up to the top of the page and click on the Contact Us menu item. And in the dialog box that pops open, make sure you open that little menu and choose this show, TheFIX, so that your message will find its way to me. I'm Seán Duggan. Thanks very much for watching. Catch you next week on TheFIX.